What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Rants and Reviews, my favorite podcast, your least favorite. I'm going to be talking about books today. Again, today we're going to look at Malice by John Gwynne. Yeah, very cool. Well, not that cool, actually. This book was a massive disappointment for me, and I'm pretty bummed out about it for a couple of reasons. One, I had been looking forward to reading this book and hopefully getting into this whole series. I think it's 4 books in this series that are really, really positively reviewed on Goodreads, have a lot of momentum behind them. Has been compared to Game of Thrones, which I know is ridiculous because they compare everything to either Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or whatever. And it also bums me out because if you can see here on the cover, hell of a debut, highly recommended by Con Iggulden. Con Iggulden is one of my favorite writers. He's the author of the historical fiction series based around Genghis Khan that I absolutely adore. So for him to be like, oh, this stuff is great, and for me to read it and be like, yeah, kind of bums me out. So let's get into why this book was so disappointing. First of all, it's always difficult to go into a series, to go into a book when your expectations are really high because of all the positive reviews and all the great things that you've heard about it. Now, I was a little bit wary before I opened this book because I have a close friend of mine who actually read this book before me, although I shouldn't say read it because he did not finish it. He told me that the writing was so bad that he hated it so much that he just put it down after about 60 pages. And that really surprised me. But he also was reading it right after reading Joe Abercrombie, who is arguably his favorite writer. And I get it. After reading this book, I totally understand what he meant. Now, I did finish it, but I get what his complaints were because Abercrombie is such a good writer and he writes with so much humor and depth, and his characters are interesting and multifaceted and have layers and are believable, and he likes to subvert your expectations and surprise you. And John Gwynne does none of these things in Malice. I didn't hate the book. I just decided very early on that I was going to speed read it, that I was basically going to skim it, and that was fine. It was an agreement I made with myself because I realized early on that the writing stinks and that by skimming it, I wasn't going to miss any beautiful phrases or any interesting quotes. And I also realized that I knew exactly what was going to happen in this book. So I didn't need to read carefully to catch bits of foreshadowing or anything. Everything is just spray painted on the wall in front of your face. It's so clear what's going to happen. So I just read it very quickly. And I actually got through this almost 600-page book, somewhere around there, in maybe 4 or 5 days without even really enjoying it that much. So yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Now, to get into a little bit more depth, I will break down some of the facets about this book. So first, let's talk about the writing. How many people do you know that just grunt in response to every question? Hey, you going out later? Did you like that watermelon I made for you? Hey, what did you do yesterday? Because that's what everybody does in this book. It's just grunting, grunting, grunting. I just don't get it. Like, I don't know where he got this idea that this is how people talk or interact with each other. My guess is that he just sucks at writing dialogue, had nothing interesting to say, and so gave that to his characters. And it's annoying. It's not a deal breaker or anything, but it is annoying. Um, Another thing that really annoyed me, Malice uses the same style of point of view chapters that Game of Thrones was so famous for, A Song of Ice and Fire was so famous for, but they're just so, I don't know. deliberate, obvious that it just kind of irks me. So what I mean by that is that each chapter is named after the character. So if the chapter is from Corbin's point of view, it will be called Corbin. The chapter will be called Corbin. And then when you get to the first sentence, almost every single first sentence in every chapter of this book is that character doing something. So if the chapter is Corbin, the first sentence is like, Corbin grunted as he tied his shoes. Or if the chapter is Kywin, then the first sentence is, Kywin grunted as she threw a knife into a tree. Or if the chapter is Veritas, then it is, Veritas grunted because he had nothing interesting to say. And I'm sure it was like a deliberate choice by John Gwynne to write that way, but God, it just felt like awful. It just felt like middle school writing to me. And I did not enjoy it. Now, moving on to the characters. Again, they're not bad. The characters aren't bad. They're just so underwhelming and eye roll inducing at times, and just tropey, just one dimensional. So like, the number one protagonist in this book is Corbin. Corbin is the stereotypical young boy who's prophesized to do great things, who is just a really good person and has special abilities and all this crap. And it's just, we've seen it 1,000 times. And I like Corbin. Of course I like Corbin. How could I not like Corbin? He's nice. He's nice to his sister. He listens to his mother. He has cute pets. He stands up for people who need help, the weak. And of course, he's amazing with a sword, like everybody else in this book. What's not to like? But that's the whole problem. There's no depth. There's no gray. Like Game of Thrones was so famous for this. And that's why I don't understand the comparison at all. One of many reasons that characters were morally ambiguous. You almost never had a character that was just good or just evil. There were a few, but most of the characters, the really memorable ones, the well-drawn ones, were interesting because of that complication, that they had good things about their personality and their character, and they had bad things. And that's what made them real. That's what made them believable, because that's what most people are like. Most people aren't just good or evil. And Corbin is just good. There's nothing bad about him, unless you would consider boring and unoriginal as bad. So a lot of the characters are kind of like this, and one-dimensional in particular. Like, characters they have a thing, a shtick, and that's how they're known. Like his sister, Kywin, she throws knives. She's angry and she throws knives. Like, and it's just like, I don't know. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, and this book is not marketed as a young adult novel, but it feels like it was written for kids. And it feels almost at times like it was written by a kid. Very young adult feeling to me, because it reminds me of when I was a teenager. When I was 15 years old, I skateboarded. I was a skateboarder. I identified myself as a skateboarder. So I could be a character in this book. I could be Adam, the skateboarder. That's who I am. I am the kid who skateboards. And that's what you get in this book, is a bunch of characters that have a thing that defines them. Kywin, the knife thrower, or Gar, the stable master, or Veritas, the king's man, or Castile, the guy who is upset about his cousin. Like, everyone has just like a thing, and it just feels really shallow and uninteresting. Also, there's a lot of scenes that just don't feel particularly believable. Like when you read the character doing something, and in your head you're like, why would they do that? The motivations are unclear. And then you're like, oh, I know why they're doing that. It's because the plot needs them to do that. The plot needs them to do that, so then this next thing can happen. So often in this book, the characters just feel like plot devices. They don't feel like real people. They just feel like a device to get you from point A to point B. Which brings me to the plot. There is an interesting premise here. Unfortunately, I think the premise is the most interesting part. The blurb on the back of the book is more interesting than the book itself. There are these gods that have been banished from the world, but are now returning, and they're going to be fighting for control. And each side is going to basically use one champion to do their bidding. And who are these champions? Who are they? Who are they? Even though it's incredibly obvious who they are. There are also 7 magic artifacts, and there are giants in the world, and there's some earthbending, but none of it really matters, or at least it doesn't in this first book. The giants are here, and they're semi-interesting. There is one magic artifact that you see towards the end of the book, but it never really matters. It's never really explained why it's magic or what it does or why it matters. The gods behind the scenes, again, are referred to a few times, but don't really take an active role in the story. So what do we get instead? We get the typical, young farm boy or young stable boy or whatever you want to call him, who, is obviously going to be the hero. And we're watching him grow into this hero and learn all of these skills. Oh, somebody's teaching him how to be a sword fighter, of course. Oh, look, now he's got a wolf pet and nobody else has one, of course. And, and then he goes through some trials and tribulations towards the end. He suffers a little bit to, cement the strength of his character. It's not bad. It's just been done a lot. So I've heard some people talk about, oh, this is this really great fresh take. And I couldn't disagree more. I don't think there's really anything fresh about it. And again, I'm not trying to bash it too much. It's not horrible. It was totally readable for me, despite not liking the writing and despite knowing exactly where the plot was going, and despite the characters being underwhelming. I still didn't have any problem reading it. And I think that's the one redeeming quality and what saves a lot of this book is that, I guess in combination with my speed reading, the plot moves really quickly. So it's not a slow book. It might be a little bit slow in the beginning, but towards the middle, once it starts to gain momentum, and especially in the last third of the book or so, it's really zipping along. Things are happening. And that, I think that helps to cover up a lot of the warts in this book. Now, the bummer, again, is back to the fact that there are 3 more books in this series, and I really am reluctant to continue because this one was just not very good. And I feel like I know what's going to happen in the next book already. I even went ahead and read the blurb for the next book, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen. And I can't see there being any surprises in there. So I don't know. I think I'm done. I think I'm done with this series. Sorry, John Gwynne. If I can find it on audiobook, maybe I'll give it a listen. And I do want to give him one more chance because I think this is his first book, maybe 2012. And I know that he's had a couple come out in the last few years that have gotten, again, very good reviews. So maybe I'll take a break for a year or two and come back and give him another try in a year or two. Because again, I didn't hate it, but just really underwhelming. So if you want to get into the score for Malice by John Gwynne, for story, I gave it a 7. Story is not bad. It moves, things happen, but it is very predictable. For language, I gave it a 6. Again, the writing is just very wooden. Descriptions of people and places are just either non-existent or just really poorly done. For ideas, I gave it a 6. The ideas that I talked about as the premise are actually pretty interesting, but you don't really get any of it in here. What you get is the classic kid who's a hero, learns how to fight with a sword, yada, yada, yada. For characters, I gave it a 6. Again, these characters are just very one-dimensional. They're all good at sword fighting. They're all good or evil. Nothing really to remember. And for enjoyment, I gave it a 6. Again, just pretty much 6s across the board for Malice. That gives it an overall score of a 6.2, which is 3 stars in my book. Not good, not terrible, just mediocre stuff. So that's it for today. I would love to hear what you thought about Malice by John Gwynne. Was I too harsh? Or were you like my friend who couldn't even get halfway through the book? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you next time on Ransom Reviews.